Welcome back. Well, today I'm joined again by Sheriff Don Barnes, who had some additional information that he wanted to share with us that we were unable to cover in our last interview. Well, Sheriff Barnes, thank you for joining me again. There were so many things that we wanted to discuss. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
So, protests, scary stuff we see on TV. And, you know, we haven't seen it in our village, thank goodness, nor really around here. Nothing has been violent. It's been, if at all, it's been very mild. But please help us understand what is happening.
Sure. Well, there has been, obviously, the First Amendment is the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution is a great document, and in that is the First Amendment. And I have been personally, and this department has been a tremendous supporter of the First Amendment and those who choose to exercise those rights. And we have a great strategy when we actually deploy in support of protecting one's First Amendment rights. We had the unfortunate incident that happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd. I can tell your viewers that that is not a technique, if you even want to call it that. That is not anything we do within the Sheriff's Department. That's the first time I've ever seen anything like that used as a law enforcement technique. And I was without words when I witnessed it. But as a result of that, we obviously saw people protesting throughout the nation, and even here in Southern California in large numbers. We, as a Sheriff's Department, we run the largest department in the county, obviously. We patrol about a quarter of the county's residents through direct patrol services, but we also have an obligation through mutual aid to go out and support the activities of other law enforcement agencies within Orange County, and that is what we did. We went to what's called tactical staffing, which means everybody's days off were canceled. So we have a full deployment or contingent of personnel that we can deploy. And we actually participated in 52 protests in support or actual deployment of. At one point, we had 18 squads, it's 12 people, 12-person squads that were in Anaheim during their heightened protest, and a tactical team, which is our SWAT team, and also a helicopter was out there in support of Anaheim, as well as others, Huntington Beach and areas within Orange County. I think the interesting thing about the protest, which of course is a First Amendment protected right, if you go to the language of the First Amendment and what it means is the right of individuals, people, to peaceably assemble, right, and then express their opinions, and that is fine, and that's what we have no problem with, and that is what we support. But I think what gets lost in this is when people either have infiltrated a protest as an antagonist, or some people come in and try to ride that protest for their own personal benefit, like we saw in some areas of Southern California with looting and crime was being committed. That is when that activity changes from First Amendment protected activity to criminal violations of law, and it's declared an unlawful assembly, which is what happens. And what's hard, I think, for some people to understand, people will say, well, I was there protesting. Why did I have to go? Because why was it an unlawful assembly? I was just holding a sign. We don't know. Law enforcement doesn't know who's there anymore to be participating in the First Amendment right, and it makes it very difficult for us to tell at face value who's there as a First Amendment protected right protester or demonstrator, and those who are committing criminal law violations. So some of these antagonists that people come out to cause problems, they interweave themselves with the protesters as they throw rocks, bottles, and other things like that. So that's what we do. We try our best, and we, for the most part, had a lot of really good people come out to be heard and supported through Orange County. At least in Orange County, it didn't get out of control like we saw in some other areas. And that's what we are there to do, to make sure that is what our people at least in Orange County, do.
So when you talk about the ones who are creating the violence and the looting, it's a totally separate group, right?
Well, there's several things. I have had the fortunate experience of doing this many, many times over my career over the last several decades. And there are professional protesters. There are people who are self-proclaimed antagonists that come out. They try to interweave themselves with protest groups. This is how this happens at times, and I'm not saying this about any group. Let's say that there's a group of high school students and they post on Facebook or whatever medium that they're going to use, we're going to come out and protest, we'll be at this location, and they share it out there. And they may have 50 or 100 of their friends that come out in support of that message, and that is perfectly fine. but that gets shared with other people, and other people grab onto that and say, we're going to go out with this other motive of trying to elicit them to act out in a criminal manner, either through vandalism or through violence or some other way that transitions that. They hijack people's peaceful protests. They really come in and change the tone of it in a way that gets that elicits a police response. And some of these are such professional antagonists. They do this almost as a business. Go in, take over, to elicit some type of police response that they will later come back and try to sue government, sue the law enforcement agency for either tactics they didn't like or being too brutal or whatever it might be. It's been something I've experienced personally over my tenure in the sheriff's department, and we have a really good strategy to how we keep that from happening here. In fact, it didn't happen here because we have had a good posture in how we respond to these things.
Excellent, excellent. Now, of course, a lot of what has happened has sort of gone into a discussion of police reform. And then there's so much banter going back and forth and arguments, and it doesn't really depend on where you are hearing it. It's all over the country. So what is your position on that?
Well, we have been advocating for reform in many different ways. Me personally for years, and maybe not, your viewers may not be aware of this. If you look at the argument, the defund the police argument that's been going about, and that rhetoric that comes with it, it's kind of a national movement, but it's a small group of people that I think are very focused on a different outcome, which is abolishing law enforcement. But if you look at the argument about some of them using about social programs, I've been screaming from the mountaintop on these issues for years about the necessity to fund intervention strategies for homeless and for the mentally ill and for the substance use abusers that are addicted to drugs or alcohol or other things that cycle them through my jail routinely. When you have people that come through the jail over and over and over again for these things, or put a different way, when you have somebody in mental health crisis, the first person that they come in contact with during mental health crisis should not be a law enforcement officer. It should be somebody else who has the ability to intervene much earlier within that person's illness before they get into crisis, so they can prevent it in the first place. Dealing with the homeless, we have 25 individuals from my organization, 3 sergeants and 22 deputies who do nothing but homeless outreach. They are trained at a very high level with crisis intervention training. They know how to talk to them. They know how to reach out and get them into services. It's all done with people who are trained in special, and they do this in concert with other members of healthcare and outreach groups. It's not just law enforcement. But we get called out for the crime violation part of it, the nominal crimes that occur over time that we want to be able to curb. But that's part of a strategy to have hand-picked people who do these things, not just them coming in contact with somebody, a deputy just who's out in operations handling a broad-based calls for service.
Can you give me, I'm sorry, can you give me an example of what that would look like? So for instance, if you got a call, what would that call be? And then once you got that call, what actually would happen?
It's in what regard? Within homeless?
With the homeless, yes. Mm-hmm.
So, well, if it's either one of the two, let's talk about the mental ill, for example. So we, generally speaking, if you look at what's happened over decades in California, mental hospitals have been closed. Mental health services have not been given a priority in funding through the state. So these failures in funding have resulted in gaps in services. And over time, those gaps in services have been met by law enforcement. We should be at the end of the line as an intervention strategy, not somewhere at the beginning.
Right.
We've had people who have actually had restraining orders against loved ones because they can't deal with their mental illness. And this just does not end well oftentimes. They end up going back to the home. We get called out for a violation of a restraining order. There may be a use of force to get them into custody. We take them for services, but there's nowhere to take them. Our trauma care in our hospitals have become the de facto mental health crisis stabilization units. And they're not designed for crisis stabilization or mental illness. They're designed for medical trauma. And all these things are just a system that's not well built. But I can tell you in Orange County, going back to strategies that I've been involved with for years, and when I took office last year, myself and the chair, Supervisor Andrew Doe predominantly, started a mental health initiative known as the Integrated Services Plan. How do we get these things funded and put in place? And there's a Be Well campus that's going to be coming online in the future that is an all-inclusive service center for people who are in crisis, long before they come into contact with law enforcement. And there's the goal to build these things out over time. Of course, all these discussions took place during a different economy that we are now experiencing today is much different. When you look at the costs of government, it's based off of revenue services like taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, and other services. And those are going to be significantly impacted as we go into this next year. So we have a really good start in these programs. My hope is that we keep them funded and moving forward and expand them where necessary so that the right person is intervening and not necessarily always a law enforcement officer. There are times when we have to be there, but we should not be the default and always be the person providing those services.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. In fact, we have done an interview regarding the Be Well Center, and it sounds like a wonderful opportunity. So I'm hoping that will move forward and everyone will be able to utilize that facility, because I don't think it's open now, right?
No, the first part of it will be open, I think, within a year, and there's an expansion that we're planning for a second campus that will be coming up. But the other issue that you raised, which is a good one, and some of this is just information that's not known. I did probably about 20 of these panel discussions on police reform in a Zoom type environment meeting. And when people would make a statement, they would, and I'll just pick one, we have to do something about use of force and how it's tracked and monitored. And my response would be, I'd understand why you would say that, because you probably don't know that we already do that. We monitor our uses of force. We have a very robust evaluation process. And in that, we have ways that if there's conduct that's not appropriate, we address it and correct it and hold people accountable. In 2019, for example, we had almost 357,000 police interactions with members we serve. That's a big number for a law enforcement agency. And of that, we had only 421 uses of force. And the use of force, by definition in this agency, is anything beyond mere touching. So if I have to grab somebody and move them onto the hood of a car to get them to restrain them, that's considered a use of force. And most of our uses of force were controlling force by using the hands, not using a baton or some other act. That number is extremely low. That number, 421 out of 357,000, is a very, very low number nationally comparatively. And the other thing that came up was about accountability. And I hear this all the time. You never hold your deputies accountable. Well, that's not true either. We had in 2019, 126 internal affairs cases that we investigated on almost 200 members of the department. Some had more than one person in the investigation. But this is what I think people would be shocked to hear. Of those cases, 84% of the cases that were started by members of this department starting an internal affairs case by us recognizing conduct that didn't meet our standards and needed to be looked at. Or put differently, only about 3 in 20 were cases brought to us from the public through a complaint. We were recognizing behavior and we act on it. We hold people accountable, up to including termination from the department if that is warranted based on the conduct of the individual. But these are things that aren't normally heard by the general public. And there was another movement called the 8 Can't Wait. These were 8 things that needed to be done by law enforcement. It's things like having oversight, the use of force oversight, or certain policy decisions that were need to be done. Well, we had done all 8 of them years ago, well, except for one. One was the carotid control hold, which is a neck hold. We recently suspended that. But outside of that, all the 7 others that were being brought as this national movement for police reform, we did those years ago. And I'm not saying that that's not a bad thing to have the dialogue and discussion, but you also have to give us credit for the things that we have already done to be forward-thinking, forward-leaning, and be contemporary in how we deliver services to the public who expects high level of service and, most importantly, with restraint of its peace officers. And I think we are ahead of the curve.
Well, good information for sure. And I definitely am here to make sure that our residents are informed. So again, I'm really happy that you could join us because, you're exactly right. We get one side of information, but you're never really getting the full story. So then it's my turn to go out there. Okay, I need the full story. I need to know why we're only seeing one side of things, and it's very, very disturbing and concerning to our residents, because this station is the only true station that they have for Orange County information. So I'm glad you could come on and share that. So thanks for all that information. That's great. Now, in regards to the defunding of the police or reform or anything like that, there is proposed legislation out there. Can you share with us what that is?
Sure. I think that this is just part, again, of the crisis that was created as a result of Minneapolis. And through that, there are a lot of legislators, not only in California, but also nationally, looking at how to change or correct what they perceive to be some of the failures of public safety. And so there's a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon, so to speak, on police reform. Use of force legislation to take away some of the tools that we have is being done. Changing the way we do business through legislation is one. Probably the one that has me most concerned, though, specific to Orange County, is an assembly bill that's, if it's passed, will take by statute 95% of the juvenile justice court, the JJCPA, Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act, that was passed decades ago, will redirect 95% of those monies to public entities, community-based entities, and preventing it to be used by law enforcement. I say that specific to Orange County for this reason, because two programs we have in sheriff's jurisdiction that have been modeled or hailed to be modeled by the state is our school mobile assessment and resource team, which are deputies, an investigator, a sergeant, and a psychologist that do nothing but respond to and evaluate school-based threats. Children who are acting out, making threats of violence, they investigate those, and crimes that occur on school campus. And they've been very good at intervening appropriately, identifying acts and preventing them. And I mean acts that are Columbine-like acts, taking weapons out of kids' rooms, taking bomb-making materials away from kids, all these things that you would think would never happen in Orange County. Mm-hmm. Most recently, we just replicated the program in North Orange County, which is not predominantly a sheriff's jurisdiction, but it needs to be done to protect all of Orange County. And the other is a program known as decentralized intake, and it has a program with Pepperdine University, who are marriage and family therapists under the direction of a psychologist, who take kids who are acting out in inappropriate ways, either through their parents bringing them to us, a referral from a school, either teacher or administration of a school bringing those to our attention, or through law enforcement contact, where rather than take them to the juvenile justice system and through the court, we intervene through a diversion strategy and get them help to make them make better decisions. And it could be through drug use, again, crimes, and other things. And that is another program that's very successful. But without the monies that are coming through the state to fund those programs, those programs don't exist. I don't have it within my budget if we have, without the funding for the SMART team, those deputies, I don't have it within my budget to replace that money to keep it whole. And it's been scaled back over time, so we've been able to manage it. But those are probably two of the biggest programs at risk, as well as some of the other use of force legislation. I think that's going to change the way that we do our business, which is always concerning to me. When I started this career, I'm on my 32nd year, hard to believe. But when I started this many years ago, I had a baton, I had a gun, and I had my hands. And that's where we started from. And over time, we have had pepper spray that's been added, and taser has been added, and these techniques have changed. If we start to, and you can see our use of force numbers that are low. And I'll tell you, first and foremost, I'll always hopefully fall back on good deputies who can talk people into compliance by using good communication skills. That's the best tool I can ask in anybody to have on their gun belt, is to be able to talk to people. So we'll always start there. But if you take these other tools away, like pepper spray or a taser or things, it's only going backwards. These are less than lethal options that mean people go home, which is always our goal for every shift that we go into, is everybody goes home, including the public we serve. If we take away some of these intervention tools, and you have to then resort to either lethal force, where less than lethal force might be appropriate, it's just taking away tools that help us keep ourselves and the public safe. And we have to be very cognizant of that as some of this legislation is being entertained.
Is that going to be on the ballot in November?
Right now, these are bills that will be not on the ballot. These are bills that will be passed by either the state legislature, and there's other bills that are being looked at on a national level through Congress. But those congressional bills have a much more overarching, effect. California, I believe, is still ahead of the curve when it comes to law enforcement and policing its communities. I think we have better training. I think we have appropriate tools. I think we hire the best people. So I'm more focused on the California-centric legislation as it's being proposed. And some of these I really they're just opportunist bills. They're taking advantage of this tragedy in Minneapolis to take their personal platform and try to propel that forward. And I don't think that always ends up with good public policy. Right. So these are Assembly and Senate bills that are being considered, and hopefully we will be heard when we have voice. There are some good bills, though. I tell you that there are bills I am supportive of, and for all the right reasons, but some of them do cause me some concern.
Well, good. Well, I'm sure that our residents will be able to voice their opinions on these to our Assemblywoman. She's usually with us every once every other week, so I'm sure they will be letting her know about that. Well, I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time again. Great job and everything that you do. Thank you for protecting our fabulous county and keeping us safe. And thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
All right, we'll see you again.
Bye-bye.
And we'll be right back after this.